one of the key things when it comes to the Bible is obviously certain texts are used, and there's a quote that I use which basically says a text taken out of context becomes a pretext. And when you try and understand a text, especially in the Bible, it's important to understand your word bias, your own bias, but also the bias maybe within the text itself. If you simply want to find something in the Bible that supports your idea or opinion, no matter how irrational, you can. To gain a proper understanding of the Bible, there are a number of things you need to do, and this is to get the right context. And those 5 points there you need to look at to actually get a proper context, which makes sure that the text you're talking about or looking at is not going to be used in some way to justify bad or poor behaviour. Obviously it comes from the Bible, and for example, here's one about women. It was said by one of the writers in the New Testament, Paul, that women should not speak, and I do not permit a woman to teach a man, she must be silent. Now today no one would say women can't speak in church or teach, because many women do. However, some do use this to suggest that women cannot be in leadership of the church or can't teach in the church. So some questions to think about. You'll need to have a look at those 4 questions and actually think about whether or not they are correct, and what other suggestions you could find out in order to understand that text properly. Now, in the Church of England recently, the first women bishop was welcomed into the church. They've allowed women priests for a long time now, but this was the first time a woman had been ordained into being a bishop. Now, the Roman Catholic Church, on the other hand, does not allow women to be priests, and certainly wouldn't allow them to be bishops. And basically they interpret the texts differently. One key part of that would be they believe Jesus only had male disciples, therefore only males can be priests. Now, they would have a literal versus non-literal understanding of the text. They're clearly interpreting the Bible differently. One is being more liberal and not saying the text means exactly this, therefore you can't do this, and the other is obviously being a bit more liberal, saying possibly that time of Jesus was a very specific time in a specific place, and we need to adjust our thinking and also our understanding of the sexes because we live in a different time and a different culture. And therefore they come to a different conclusion, and clearly they're both sets of Christians, but they understand the Bible differently, therefore have different outcomes. That's because they have interpreted the text differently as well. Again, here are some things that we could ask ourselves that would be good for you to think about. Explain the phrase "a text taken out of context becomes a pretext." Make sure you can understand that. Give a reason why the Roman Catholic Church only allows male priests. Explain how the story of Adam and Eve could be used to promote equality. And give an example of how the Church of England Church has shown greater equality between men and women. And 5, explain a Bible quote that suggests why women can't be leaders in the church. Now, in the Bible itself, there are lots of stories, quotes that you could use. So I'm obviously going to pull some texts out that are very hopefully clear texts that would be used in favour of equality. This text here talks about male and female being created by God, which implies that they're both of the same value. Jesus often taught that you should love your neighbour as yourself. Your neighbour is anyone that is near you or next door to you, or that you're working with. Your neighbour is simply anyone else. There's a quote from Paul that says here, there's no Jew or Greek, slave or free, they're all one in Christ, they're all the same, they're all equal. Jesus talked about don't judge others, otherwise you will be judged, which kind of cuts out the idea of prejudice, discrimination. For in the same way you judge, you will be judged yourself. So the measure you use when you're thinking and acting towards others is the measure from a Christian perspective that God will judge you. So that implies you shouldn't treat people in an inferior way. The story of the Good Samaritan is a classic story that talks about treating people equally, and especially those who maybe you consider less equal than yourself. Again, the story we looked at earlier, the idea of Jesus not condemning a woman, the one who was caught in the act of adultery, and accepts her unconditionally. And then there's a quote from the book of Revelation at the end of time where they're all standing before God, And it says, "After this I looked, before me is a great multitude of people that no one can count, from every nation, tribe, people and language." So it's clear from this that the idea of heaven is a multicultural place. Racists will not like heaven because it has all people from all tribes, all languages in its environment. Now, often Jesus talked very much about equality, or the way he didn't outrightly talk about equality, but certainly from the stories, the idea of treating people in a fair and equal way is very much part of it. And all of these quotes could be used to suggest that Christianity is in favour of equality, but you need to remember they all have specific contexts, but can be used to promote equality. Let's now look at racism. Racism has been one of the causes for inequality around the world, and in our current culture, this idea of immigrants or people who come over from other countries to work is one that divides people as well. So we're going to have a look at this now. Racism basically means where you distinguish someone as inferior or superior to other race or races that are different from you. Now, it's really important here. This has led to people being enslaved, given no rights, housing, poor housing, beaten and killed, and no education. So it's a massive, big deal. Some of the causes of racism may simply be that some people have a sense of superiority. They feel they're better than someone else. They might have been brought up in an environment that suggests that they are better than other people. Ignorance, that people just are ignorant to the fact that they are being racist and it's offensive. And obviously history plays a part in terms of the way certain people have been treated as well. None of these are acceptable, but they're all possible causes of how racism could have happened. Now, in Britain today, let's have a look, because often people talk about the number of foreign people in the UK. So let's have a look at what we're dealing with here. Britain tries to have a multicultural approach. So let's have a look at the percentages here of the people that are in the UK. Here they are. And you can see very, very clearly that over 90% of the people in the UK are white. If you're going to look at it on a pie chart, it looks actually like this. So whenever you talk to people, or you hear people on the radio, or you hear people on television, you get the impression that it was 50-50 or less than that. But clearly, the predominant group of people are white British people, and not lots of other races. Paddington, this idea that migration is where people move from one place to another place for a variety of reasons. And here are some of the reasons why someone might leave their country and go to another country. They might fear death, there might be war, there might be a lack of freedom or jobs or political instability. And I'm sure if we often thought about these things, if this happened in our country, we'd want to escape and go somewhere that we felt was safer, not necessarily to steal its benefits, but to enable us to live a life. Martin Luther King, again, was a Christian, and he was obviously the lead historical figure when it comes to this issue of racism. So, what did he do? Well, he basically took a non-violent approach and told his followers to do as Jesus did, to love their enemies and pray for them. He believed love and non-violence were powerful enough to defeat evil. He believed that Christian faith was about fairness, justice and equality for all people, that God had created everyone equally. He was a preacher, he was a priest, he was a Christian minister. He read his Bible and he believed that in that Bible, this is what this Bible told him, that everyone was equal. And his belief in God and fairness fueled his desire for justice for black people. Now, today, all mainstream Christians would be against racism. You'd find hardly any that would be in any way in favour of racism. And again, for all the reasons we've said, Jesus teaching people to love their neighbour, the idea of God creating people equally, Jesus' teachings about how you need to treat people with compassion, help those in need, the story of the Good Samaritan. And in fact, most Christians believe they have a duty to end racism wherever they are, in any way that they can. So Christians would be clearly against racism, and they would use the Bible to back this up. This is a quote from the book of Revelation that I've mentioned before, that talks about all people from every nation, tribe, people and language standing before God and standing before Jesus at the end of their time. And this is talking about the fact that there'll be all people from all cultures. So, as I said before, racists won't like heaven. It's far too multicultural. Well, let's have a little review again. Again, take some time to think about these questions, where you can pause this if you want to think about if you can answer these questions. Can you give a definition of racism? Can you give an example of the effects of racism? Can you give one cause of racism and explain why? Can you give at least 2 Bible quotes that would oppose racism? Can you give one reason why people might migrate to another country? Can you explain how Martin Luther King used his beliefs, Christian beliefs, to stand up against racism? And can you use a Bible quote that teaches Christians how to treat others equally? Again, these questions are good questions to get you thinking, and maybe you need to go back to actually watch again